So today I'm going to show you how you can make your own watercolor backgrounds for your paper projects and your mixed media projects using many items that you've probably already got in your home. So simple and cheap, just what we want. So keep watching to find 8 ways to create your own backgrounds. Okay, so the first thing we're starting off with is something that everyone has in their homes. It is simply using salt. So you can use rock salt, you can use sea salt, you can use cooking salt. The only difference is you get different effects depending on the size of the grains of the salt. So let's have a go using rock salt, and also I have got some cooking salt here that we're going to try. So this is one of a really simple technique where we create texture. What you need is some sort of wide brush and some clean water. Got to have lovely clean water when we're working with watercolor. The sheet I'm using here is A3 size, and as you know, if you've watched any of my videos before, I work on a drafting table, so I do have a slight slope on my table, and so things do naturally run because of that. However, if you're working on a table that is flat, you can simply tilt your paper to get similar effects to what I'm getting. It is the thinner paper, so we may get some warpage happening. If you get any warpage happening, my simple solution is to iron your paper. I just iron my paper between 2 clean white pieces of paper, get it flat again. Easy peasy. All right, so we need to apply some water straight onto our paper. Now, if you've watched anything about watercolor before, you will understand that water lets our paint disperse easily across the page. We want what we call the wet on wet technique for this particular technique with the salt. So we're wetting our page first. You can just do some splatters of water on there if you like, but if you want good coverage and movement of your paint when you put it on here, you want the surface to be damp, so the paint will travel through the surface of the water and smudge out. Smudge, is that a word? Splurge out? It will seep out is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so I'm thinking because I'm using a large piece of paper, I'm going to go with some of my large watercolor goldy mustardy yellow here. Now when I drop it into the paper, it naturally flows out depending on how much water has pooled in the areas of the paper. You can do this as a single colour, or might just drop some more water on there, or you can mix colours together. Now if there's anywhere it's not running enough, you can just put some more water with it and it will start to merge wherever you want it to go. It's a lovely colour, this. Now it's because I've got thin low cost paper, the water has seeped in quite quickly. So that is one of the negatives when you're using a cheaper paper, because it's not flowing as much as it should. But you can just fix that by adding some more water on here. Get it to move where we want it to go. Now you can see here, I'm not sure if you can see it on the camera, but it's starting to warp the paper here. You can see there's a whole collection, a big puddle here, over here, where the water is just sitting. and not moving. All right, so we've got this glorious yellow background here, but we're going to drop in another colour. So because we've got yellow, I'm thinking of putting in a blue. I'm going to try this one, which is more like a cobalt blue. Of course, when we put yellow and blue together, we're likely that we will get some greens happening. Definitely got that happening. All right, so now we can have a bit of fun with it. So I'm on a sloped table. We've got some really nice greens happening here. It is very wet and it's becoming very green down this end. Because, now can you see how the, when I'm tipping it, it's not moving, flowing very well on the paper because this is dry. So the surface is not covered with water. It's not letting the paint move across there. But if we go this way where we've got wet surface, the paint just flows wherever it's wet. Okay, so what we need to do now is put our salt on. So while your paint is still wet, the idea is that you sprinkle salt onto the surface. And then we actually have to leave it to dry. So it's going to take quite a while because I really put a lot of water and paint on here. What we'll find that happens is that the salt will soak up some of that water and colour, and you can see through here that's already happening. The salt is turning green in some places. And there's my rock salt on, but also I'm going to put some of this cooking salt because it's a bit finer and you'll get different textures showing up in your work. So remember, the salt is soaking up the pigment in the paint. Now often when I'm doing mixed media, I will say get your heat gun out and use your heat gun. You can try and do that on this, but honestly it's more successful if you leave it to dry naturally, which is what we're going to do. All right, so here I am back again with our salt, rock salt and cooking salt on our watercolour. Remember, we used the porous quality paper, so we've got a lot of warping happening, but I'll just iron that out. What I want you to look at closely is how the salt has, in some cases, drawn up the colour, but also resisted and pushed the colour away. So it is still a bit damp in some areas, but I'm just going to brush off this area, get rid of the salt here, so you can get some idea of the pattern that can be created. Really, I should be waiting for it to be fully dry, but I'm a little bit impatient. So if I carefully, just with my finger, brush off the salt, I'm just taking it from this area. You can just rub your finger over gently to remove it. Once it's really is dry properly, it comes off really easily. Okay, so I've got a lot of that off there in this area. Have a look at the pattern. and beautiful texture that's created from the salt. Okay, our next one, I'm using a piece of the Uniquely Creative cardstock, their cotton watercolor cardstock, and we're going to have a go doing another very wet medium, so that's why I'm going for this very firm cardstock. It will hold up to it. So we're going to put some water on here. So we're doing a wet and wet process again. Just about go for some of this purple lake, which is rather lovely. So I might just pop some in the middle there, straight on, and use it straight like that. Okay, where's my wide? Oops, just pop that one away. Where did I put my wide brush? Here it is. It's a bit stained from the other paints. Ooh, look at this now. Interesting. We may have to put another colour in because I think it's going to come out too pale. So the thing with watercolours is that they do tend to dry lighter than what they look like on the page. So if it's looking a bit too pastel-y for you, you may want to change it up a bit, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to pull some from my palette here this time. And what I'm going to drop in is some red. It's a cool red. Yes, that's better. Let's drop some of this in because it's just not got quite enough oomph to it. Gonna leave it like that. It's nice and subtle. It is going to be very pastel-y when it dries. I mean, I could saturate it with darker reds, but I'm not going to do that. Okay, so this one is using another technique where we've got our wet on wet, and we're going to use something to absorb some of the pigment and the water that we put on there. And the thing we're going to use is rice. So earlier we did one with salt. This technique is similar, but we're using grains of rice to create textured effect and different tones on our paper. So you can see already that the rice, being an absorbent, starts to pull the paint in. So we are going to end up with something that is very pastel-y, delicate. So when you use this technique, you want to make sure that what you're doing, where you're putting it, is where you want it to go, because it's going to pull all the pigment as it dries. I think that is all we need. So yeah, just consider that when you pick your colours, when you pick your quality of paint, that some of it will dry extremely lightly. Now, this is another one of the ones where we have to just, for the best results, we just have to let it dry. Our rice and watercolour is dry, so we just have to carefully, like we did with the salt, rub off our rice. And you'll see we get these unusual pattern left behind from the rust. I'll just stop and show you what I mean. So have a look at that. Isn't that cool? Almost looks a bit like when you look under a microscope, you know, at amoebas or something like that. It has that sort of scientific look. Or flowers, perhaps. Little delicate flowers. It's quite lovely. Really is beautiful. Look how pretty it is. Very nice. It's like spring flowers. Love it. Our next technique is also using another household product. So we've got our Uniquely Creative 360 GSM thick, medium textured, Uniquely Creative cardstock. And this time I am going to apply water across the whole thing, or most of it anyway, because I'm after a particular look to the page, and you'll see it once I put it together. All right, so I've got water, so we're going to do wet on wet again, and this time we are going to use this cheapo one, which is a Prussian blue, and I'm literally going to water it down and mix it straight onto our cardstock. I'm just going to put a little bit out there. Nice acrylic bristles, and we're going to smooth out our paint. Some of it will travel in areas where I wetted the paper. It's a gorgeous blue. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use the product, general word for it's cling wrap. In the US you call it saran wrap. Lots of Australians refer to it as glad wrap. So you just need a piece of this that's about the same size as your paper you're working with, or slightly bigger. Now, this particular technique, we just put the wrap straight onto our painted surface, and we get this amazing textural look happening. Now, this technique always makes me laugh a bit, because if you could see the walls of my craft room, you would realize this is the technique that has been used on the walls of this room that I'm in. So you can move it with your hand, scrunch it up, work out where you want more texture. What sort of cracks you want. Now I've got a bit over here, my piece wasn't quite big enough, so I'm going to pull some more in. It won't make any difference. We can just scrunch it up over here as well. All right, and you can see the paint is going to pool in certain regions. It is going to be lighter in some regions where there was more water and less pigment of the paint. And we're just going to leave that wrap on there for a little bit before we pull it off. Now, some people will leave it on to dry completely. I feel that you don't really need to do that, but I would give it a good half an hour while you're playing with something else before we remove the wrap. Okay, so here we've got our cling wrap, saran wrap, glad wrap technique, where we put down some water. We put down our water paint over the top, and then we just scrunched up some cling wrap over the top. So this has been sitting for about an hour now, and we're going to pull it off and see what we've ended up with. Oh, it looks nice. So you can see some areas are still wet. We can dry that off. You get these interesting cracked and these lines, different lines and cracks happening. I'm actually thinking that should go this way, because to me I'm seeing trees happening there, but to you it may just be cracked ice. It would be good for something like ice escapades layouts, anything to do with winter. Here we go again, another wet and wet technique. We're wetting our cardstock. This one is Vicki Boutin's lovely foundation cardstock, her mixed media cardstock. Perfect for what we're using at the moment and attempting to do. Oh, look at that, gorgeous. Let it move around here. Okay, so we've got quite a wet surface here, and what we're going to do this time is we're going to use some tissue paper. So I've got this scrap here. With tissue paper you have a shiny side and you have a matte side. We are going to use the shiny side. So what we're going to do is scrunch it up so it's very wrinkled, and then we're going to pull it out and put it onto our painted surface, and you can see how it is creating pattern on there just from that process alone. So it's much like our technique where we use the cling wrap, glad wrap, saran wrap, whatever wrap you like to call it, where we need it to dry a little bit. What I'm going to do is this time I'm going to use the heat gun and try and dry it off a bit quicker. Let's see what we're like here. You don't want to let it dry fully, because then sometimes it can be difficult to remove the paper. But what you end up with, because the paper, of course, like any paper, is going to soak up your paint, so you're ending up with this really delicate design on your page. It's almost like a white print. So we've got this beautiful delicate texture happening. It's really pretty. It's much like the veins of a cabbage. In this case, you get this very delicate look happening. These techniques I'm showing you are just to give you a background to start with. It's a bit like when you do base pages for layouts. It's just to work on top of. So we've got this amazing texture we've created here. But on top of that, you can stamp, you can paint, you can draw, you can glue things to it. You can make your scrapbook layout. You can layer paper. You can add embellishments. You can turn it into a piece of art to hang on the wall. Okay, while I've still got my paintbrush here, I think I'm just going to add a few little splatters. Okay, next one we are going to be using the Vicki Boutin Foundation Mixed Media Paper. So remember, this one is completely smooth. And this one also was one of the better quality ones. So I think it was 300 GSM, so quite a firm cardstock this time. Once again, we need our clean water and we need to wet the surface of the paper. Now we shouldn't see the same sort of problems with the warping this time, because it is a good quality paper. Vicki Boutin one is lovely. Now this time I'm just splashing some water around. So we'll see what happens when we add our paint. All right, so what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to use one of our tubes of paint. So remember I said you just put a little squirt into your palette and they will keep for years and years, to be honest. And then you just activate it with your paintbrush, which of course to activate it we're just adding some water. Now because they're tiny little areas, smaller than what we were working with before, I'm just going to go for a much smaller brush. This one right here, well loved and used one. It's a rounder brush, it's quite bristly, so I'm going to go with that. And I think what we will do this time is what will we do? Maybe we'll go with some green. Drop some green in and see what happens with it. Okay, so it's a quite light green, a leaf green. Now I didn't brush the water over the whole page, so you can tell quite quickly where there's a lot of water and where there's not, because the paint's not really moving that well. We might have to add more water. Okay, so now it's time to add to our watercolour paint we've got on here. Pretty happy with some of this. Now we're going to see what happens to it when we add our secret ingredient, which you will have at home. And that ingredient is lemon juice. So I've got some lemons here that I have sliced in half. You can, if you like, remove your seeds first. And you can squeeze your lemons straight onto here, or if you want to. Now, can you see what's happening? So when I squeeze the lemon on, it creates a resist look, and our colour moves away from it. Oops, looks like we've got the Amazon River running down. I'm just going to hold it up because of my sloping desk. And can you see what happens? You get this interesting look comes out. The lemon juice pushes the paint away. Right, so what I'm going to do now is I am going to dry it off a bit. And I'm going to use some paper towel just to get these really wet areas. Oh, look, some paper towel's got print on it. So what we're getting is some printing happening as well. Interesting. Okay, so one of the things that happens with the lemon juice is because it pushes the paint out, you get these lighter areas occurring where you had paint before. So it could be quite interesting, especially if you're going for that sort of vintage look. If we use browns, you could get a really aged look happening on your paper. I'm going to just drop in a little bit more paint. Where is that? Here we go, this one. Of the dark green forest through here. Might just even paint a circle in here. Okay, and what you should see is what happens more clearly when we drop the lemon juice onto the paint. Oh, that looks quite nice, doesn't it? It's reminding me of moon, the evening moon. Now I'm going to hold it flat because I don't want it to run. I just want you to see what happens. Can you see that? And I'm dropping that lemon juice in. It pushes it out, almost turns it into the look of geocrystals. Let's try one more. I'm just going to use that same forest green and put a circle here. Not a very good circle, it's very egg-shaped. Okay, and if you watch me drop the lemon on top of this, just putting a drop or two in, you should be able to see on camera how it pushes the paint out and away. The paint doesn't like the acid in the lemon. Okay, for this one, it's another wet on wet, so we need to wet our surface. I'm going to wet the whole paper this time. So it shouldn't be soaking wet, but there should be a light sheen of water across the surface of your paper. Okay, and we're going to drop in some paint for the background. Sepia brown. That looks very sepia-ish. Let's have a look. Oh, yes it is. So we're dropping this in. You can see it's starting to run through the water. Do make sure you've got some areas that are dark and some that are lighter. I'm going to do the whole sheet. You of course cannot see all of it because this is once again the Derivan A3 watercolour paper. So it's going off camera down the bottom here. Okay, I have got some sepia brown on here. I'm going to take it right to the corners this time. I don't really know why, but that's what I feel like doing. And along there. Okay, and I'm going to drop in a second brown. I've got this really dark one here, chocolatey. Throw that over the top. See what happens with it. If it's not moving much, you can add some more water. Watercolour paint's so fun because you just never know what you're going to end up with when you're doing these just random dump it on there. I feel I want to drop some yellow, mustardy yellow in there again. We'll used this before. Oh yes, that is definitely what it needs. Some yellow. Oh yes. Okay. Now, here's what we're going to put on top of it. So it's quite wet. We've got our 3 colours. So what we're going to try, it's leaking, is putting some of rubbing, the Isocol-Rubbing alcohol over the top of it. Now, a lot of you, surprisingly, will have this now in your homes because we went through that period of COVID with where we had no hand sanitizer available and lots of people were buying it. So you may already have some of this. Very handy stuff in the crafting world, not just the health world. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drop some on. I'm hoping you can see what's happening in the camera there. So it's a bit like with the lemon in that it pushes. All right, can you see what's happening here? Wow, it's cool. It's a cool effect. So we're turning what was just a piece of painted paper into something that looks a lot now like rocks. Gemstones. Now, because it's alcohol, of course, it's going to quite quickly come off, dry off. Won't take too long. I think I need a bit over there. Fun, hey? Just flipped it now so we can do the other end. It's like literally dropping it over the surface. Now, of course, the other thing you could do with it is you could actually draw with it. So I've got my little pot here. I had salt in. I'll just get rid of the salt. And we can use this to put some alcohol ink in, and I will show you what I mean. So you can use a fine paintbrush, or you could just use a skewer even. Anything that's going to hold on to the alcohol ink for a little bit. So for instance, I've got this really fine paintbrush. So if you wanted to, you could control what was happening and come up with your own design even. See how I can just draw, I can literally draw my design. Into the paint. Now where it's quite wet and the paint's heavier, you might have to reapply it. But you can have some fun coming up with some really cool markings. How fun's that? Okay, this is something a bit different. We're going to use our cardstock dry, and we're going to print on top of it using this funny packaging. So often lately I've been getting these packaging air tubes, they are basically, but I just thought perhaps I make a really lovely print using watercolour onto our cardstock. So going to give it a go, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but we'll see what happens. So what I'm thinking of is that I might go with this turquoise here, which is very minty, a lot like the packaging itself. And I'm literally going to try and get it on here. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. It's just an experiment. So in the past I have done, oops, I got some on my paper. In the past I have done printing like this with bubble wrap, which is also packaging material. And I just thought we'll see what happens with this interesting packaging, because I've had a lot of it coming in lately with different things I'm ordering. So then we are literally just going to print with it. So we're going to flip it over, plop it onto our cardstock and give it a bit of a roll around and see what we get. Ooh, look at that. Interesting. All right, we're going to do the other half now. Funny, isn't it? These are things you can use. You just got to think outside the box and get creative. I just had another idea which we might try on this as well. Try and get paint over the whole surface. Obviously it's plastic, so it's resisting the paint. Oops, there goes my watercolour tin. All right, let's do this side. And I'm going to bring it up here. And we're going to do it again and give it a little roll. We're getting those interesting lines happening. Pick it up and there we go. That's pretty interesting. This is the fun thing about being creative. Just doing your own thing, coming up with your own paper. Here we'll have our completely original work. It's like nothing else anywhere. No one else will have the same paper as this. Be interesting to see what we get. Turn it this way, pop it on here, do our little rub again. With the paper. Interesting. Just going to add some more paint so we can do the bottom half. Oh, I really like it. It's fun. Second row over here. How's that? Looks pretty cool, doesn't it? Okay, now if I go that way, just trying to work this out. I'm going to go third colour. What colour are we going to use? How about Purple might work. Okay, trying out the purple. That one I was going to use is too teal. So let's go for something completely different. Just going to pop it here so you can see me apply the paint. Alright, so I'm going to turn it. We're going this way now. Which means I'm going to move my paper down a wee bit to get it on there. Okay, let's see what's going to happen. Roll it. Lift it. Woohoo! It's quite nice. If anything, it's probably, I didn't quite get that top section too much, but it does look pretty cool. I think I prefer this side to this side. Right, the next one, we also need to put quite a bit of water on it. So I'm going to try the Derivan at 300 GSM cardstock this time. This one, we need to be wetting our surface. With this nice orange here. Let's pop some of that in. Print with it basically, so we push it down onto a wet surface. Oh, and look what happens when you lift it off. Oh, it's not really doing what I want it to do. Maybe it's this type of bubble wrap. So let's have a look at our finished watercolor backgrounds. All right, I'm really pleased with them, and all of the techniques have worked really well. So this was the first one where we used the rock salt and cooking salt on the wet on wet. So remember, wet on wet is where we put our water and then we put a watercolor paint over the top, and we had to leave the salt to dry for several hours. However, it's worth it. Look at this gorgeous pattern and texture that we get. Almost looks like the Great Barrier Reef itself, for those of you that know about the Great Barrier Reef. Of course, it's the colours that's making me think about that. So if you did this in a different colour way, if you did it in browns, if you did it in reds and oranges. It may remind you of different landscapes and give you different ideas for creating further on top of it. All of these are just bases. The idea is that you build up on top of the base that you've created. Okay, next one. Love this one too. This was our rice. So same technique. Instead of using salt, we're putting rice in this. This time it was long grain rice, and we get this beautiful pattern that occurs, almost like delicate flowers sprinkled over there with seeds. I really love this, and already I know that I've got a particular photo I'm going to use on this background, so I might share that with you later. And then we did the controversial as in regard to what we call it. So general term is cling wrap technique. If you're in the US, I think you call it saran wrap. Most Aussies call it glad wrap. However, it's all the same stuff. So basically, it is that thin plastic product that you wrap your sandwiches with. Once again, we did wet on wet. And when you leave this one to dry, you get this amazing cracked geometric sort of thing happening, almost like you're in an icy cave in this case, because we use this beautiful blue, so it's reading as winter. Even though I'm thinking if you did it in greens, it really looked like some mysterious trees traveling up the page. Gorgeous. Next one was similar, a similar technique. So except we use tissue paper. So when you use tissue paper, you're getting these really fine little lines and cracks, and it looks a bit like you've stamped or stenciled over your watercolor with white ink. If we look at this area where it's darker, it looks a lot like a cabbage leaf, something like that. So a nice technique to use if you're after something a bit gentler, or if you're after something a bit mysterious. Like to me, because I did it in greens and yellows, it's reading like it would be really lovely for a garden layout. But if you did it in pinks and purples or navies, it could be really magical for a fairy or something like that. So just changing the color will give it a different mood and feel. Okay, and then we did our alcohol, rubbing alcohol, the Isocol. So pretty impressive. We've got these fabulous, really interesting patterns where the alcohol pushes the paint away, and we end up with these circular patterns. And because I went with these brown tones, it's looking very earthy and almost like rocks. If you did it with beautiful blues, though, to me it's going to read as water. You know, when you have those drops of circles of that pattern that happens in water. So if you, once again, you change the color, you've got a completely different base that you can use for an artwork or for your scrapbook layout or whatever it is you're making. This one was the lemon juice. So the lemon juice also had a similar effect to the alcohol, but it's not as noticeable. So when we dropped it, and this was one area we dropped it into, and over here where we dropped it, it pushed it away, so it made those areas lighter. And then I tried it doing the circle, and you could see it pushing out, and so you've got a more defined circle edge. Quite useful, be fun to experiment with. I think this would be a great idea for doing like a Vicki Boutin inspired background. She often has circles in her designs, and I think probably this would be a fun way of replicating some of her similar pages, or making your own. Then this one was a bit out there. It's pretty intense and full on. I'm not sure that you'd want it as a whole background because it's very intense because I did the 3 layers. And this is probably our quirkiest one yet that you might not have heard of because I just made it up myself. So it was using our tubes of packaging. If you've skipped to the end to see what the outcome is, you need to go back and watch each of the processes because you're really missing out. This one was fun. It was a lot of fun. It was a strange product to use to get this textural effect. I think if you just did it once, you could have this lovely zebra-like effect. But because we layered it, we've got a really vibrant, intense look going down here. It'll be an interesting one to work on. I might have to go really simple with some black and white photos. This one is just messing around with doing wet and wet and some splatters and some smooshing. But you guys know how to do that already, I'm sure. Okay. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe because I will be using some of these papers in future process layouts. I'm definitely going to do something with this. I am definitely going to do something with this one. I've got an idea for this one. I'm definitely using this one. And now I want summer to hurry up so I can go to the beach and use this one. All right, thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.